SYS presents Adventures in Online Education.
Welcome, friends. You're listening to SYS Presents Adventures in Online Education. I'm your host, Natalie Conway. Thanks for being here. Friendly reminder, new this season is our AOE newsletter. Head over to aoepodcast.org and enter your info at the bottom of the page to get a weekly update from me, including thoughts on education and notes about the newest show. It's a little piece of positivity for your inbox. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Charlie Hoffmeister, speech pathologist extraordinaire. She and I have worked online together for years, and I've come to really appreciate Charlie's practical and insightful advice and thoughts around online speech services. She's a great collaborator and creative thinker who you're going to love. So, you ready? Let's learn something new. Good morning, Charlie. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Good morning. So happy to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. We have worked together for a few years now, and I'm excited for the audience to get to know you and learn from you today as much as I have learned from you over the years. So can you let the audience know kind of what your context is in education, what you're up to these days?
Certainly. So I'm a speech language pathologist, and I work virtually with students, actually through a company called E04. So for the last 4 years, that's how we've known each other. And then this most recent year, I've also started working with students in their homes in my local community of Central Oregon through my private practice, Juniper Speech Therapy.
Fantastic. That is awesome. I'm so excited for you in that small business development because I personally know that you are exceptional at what you do and you are a gift to students and families. So I'm excited for the kids of Central Oregon to get to work one-on-one with you. You are great with kids because you have your own, correct?
I do. My son is almost 4. He's actually the reason that I switched to working in virtual therapy to have a little more flexibility, which sometimes works out the way I intended.
Right. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. We both have that work from home, mom from home life going on. That is never an easy balance. How has that been working for you?
It changes every year. So obviously I'm still working face-to-face with students, so I do have to be fully present during my sessions. So a big part of the balance is getting things done when a student doesn't show up, or if I have a planned break, I can run downstairs and do something. But early on, it was really convenient because my son was little and I could just bring him to a meeting in a sling and walk around while I was on a phone call. But that doesn't last very long.
It really doesn't, does it? That phase ends a lot more quickly than you want it to. I remember doing the same thing. I could be having my daughter in the sling, wearing her, whatever. Like you said, walking around. I'd walk around the kitchen island with my laptop and we'd be bouncing and doing our math lesson. I just remember really clearly in the middle of a lesson, she started whacking a metal spoon on a counter. And I was like, okay, we're done with this now. This phase is now over. We'll need to find a new solution or adjust our schedule.
Yeah. So he goes to Montessori school most days, but when things don't work out, in COVID land, sometimes he gets the tablet or the TV to make sure that we can still be present. So no shame on anybody who's using screen time to get things done.
Heck no, my kid's on her tablet right now as we talk so that we can have this conversation. It is all good. So folks, whatever you're doing out there to make it work, keep on keeping on. You're doing great. Well, when we talk online education and online special education, people are always impressed, especially those who are not as familiar with online education. They're impressed that we can do special ed online. They're impressed that we can somehow figure out how to do art or gym through an online school. How does that work in terms of speech therapy? What are the benefits of being online for kids who have speech needs? And are there any specific drawbacks that you've seen?
Sure. So online therapy is usually one-on-one or one-on-two, which by itself might be a benefit. A lot of times in a brick and mortar situation, you have different parameters for how you can pull your groups. I pull all of my students as a pull-out model so that I see them in my speech room. That can go either way for students, whether that's a benefit or a drawback. But at least in the schools I work with so far, it's always between their classes, so they're not missing content, which is an amazing benefit.
Yes, that's huge because that's a really hard scheduling thing in special ed is figuring out when will speech services be. And I totally agree because it's nice having been on both sides of it as a special ed teacher and a gen ed teacher, being able to coordinate with the speech path and say, well, we don't have live class from 10 to 1 this day of the week. That's a nice big 3-hour time period where I don't have to, as the gen ed teacher, try to figure out what am I doing while these kids are missing because they're never missing. It's fantastic.
It is fantastic. And working across a couple schools, each school has a slightly different schedule, so I can usually keep my day full during the school hours. I love virtual speech for pretty much every kid, even the little guys, the 5s and 6s do really well, and it's entertaining for them. It's exciting for them because we can pull in a game or we can pull in a video, and there's no break in therapy. So we talked about scheduling around student needs. It's private. Nobody knows that I'm taking them out of class. Kids are aware and kids are mean sometimes, so it's nice that nobody else knows. And then I love that I can increase their generalization with their goals because we're working in their regular workspace most of the time. So it's the same for them as if they were in class and we were working on a goal. All the place-based cues are going to still help them perform those skills in their next class.
Right, because they're in a Zoom session or a similar, right? Just as they are for their math lesson or their reading lessons. Can you talk a little bit more about what that means about generalizing what they're learning in speech elsewhere or why that's important?
Certainly. So when we think about speech students typically in a brick and mortar, we know that they get really good at their skills in the speech room. And the moment they leave, they walk through that door and it just kind of falls away. And that's kind of a cool psychological phenomenon, but beside the point for us today. We want them to be able to use those skills everywhere. So a couple ways that I can increase generalization is if I'm working with a kiddo who has articulation goals, I want them to be able to use that all day, every day for school or not. So I actually encourage the parents to set up our sessions in various rooms of the house. Also happy if they need to take me with them and do a session in the car or some of those other kinds of things because now we're working in a lot of different places. And then for generalizing in the classroom goals, nothing changed for them. So if we're working on a language-based goal, they're still in a Zoom session. So hopefully all of those cues and materials are still right there for them when the similar task is done in class.
That's really fascinating. And I never thought of it beyond just the online platform and, your speech class looks like your math class kind of thing, or looks like your English class. But to think that the student can be doing speech in the living room or in the car or at the kitchen table. And if that is happening, then when they're at the kitchen table and the computer is closed, they're going to be able to generalize that skill more easily. That's fascinating. I love it. Are there any other benefits you can think of to online speech therapy?
The big benefit in my feeling is that the parents are usually right there. So normally with school-based therapy, I wouldn't see a parent except for an annual meeting or maybe conferences. But for a lot of my students, I get to touch base with parents weekly. And that can just be as quick as like, hey, these are the 5 words we're really working on this week. Or, I noticed they're having a hard time with attention. Like maybe try this. Let me know if it works. We're constantly in contact in a way that we don't get to be in other settings.
Yeah, that real-time communication and feedback, that must be so valuable. That must maybe inform what you do a lot more directly than it would in a brick and mortar.
It does. And it gives parents an opportunity to advocate for their kids in a way too. I've often had a parent be like, hey, by the way, they're having a really crummy day. Like, it's totally okay with me if you guys just like make it through 30 minutes, because building that rapport and keeping the student willing to come to speech can be just as valuable. So it's my favorite. If I could have that in every setting, I would.
Yes. Well, we always talk about stakeholders or the team, right? And we want to get everybody on the same page. And oftentimes the parent is sort of tangential to that or peripheral. And when you're doing speech one-on-one or one-on-two, and the parent is right there 5 feet away in your virtual setting, that's fantastic because they're hearing what you do so they can that you're modeling it for them. They can then replicate that at home, but then they can give you that real-time feedback. It really just makes the IEP team more cohesive and more on the same page so that when you're writing the progress report, the parent has context for that. Or when you come to the IEP meeting, the parent knows what you're talking about. There aren't so many questions. I think that's really good too. I think that's essential.
It is essential. And there's never a surprise that way. I never feel like an IEP meeting is a scary situation because we've already at least touched on the things that I need to bring up.
Absolutely. Yeah, the curtain's been pulled back. They know what's happening. Full transparency. I think that's important. Really cool. Well, I think you've made the case. I think we know that online speech therapy can be a really good thing for kids and it can absolutely work. My next question for you is how classroom teachers, so general ed teachers and special ed case managers and teachers, can piggyback on the work that a speech pathologist is doing with a child. And I guess this could be in brick and mortar or online, but especially in the online setting. What is it that we can do, the non speech pathologists, working with that same child to make sure that we're helping to generalize, like you just talked about, and that we're really creating a cohesive instructional environment for the kiddo?
I feel like this one really depends on the goals we're working on. And because of that, and there's just not enough hours in the day, I work really hard with my students to develop cognitive clarity about why they come to speech and what we're doing.
Mm.
So I feel like it's really important for them to be able to answer a teacher like, what do you do in speech today? So that teachers don't always have to get it
Yes.
directly from me. So kind of just thinking about goals in groups here, if I'm working on articulation or fluency in the virtual classroom, it's just really encouraging them to use the mic for class responses, either calling on them occasionally or giving them a little extra wait time.
That's awesome. So instead of just chatting all the time, maybe, or writing on the Google Doc, actually hitting that raise hand button or whatever it might be and coming on the microphone.
Yeah. So one thing, like I love the idea of giving students the option not to talk for so many reasons, but also kind of encouraging that this is one way that we can communicate and helping them move forward so that they have both in their skill set. For students with language needs, I find that asking them to name their strategy or their target ahead of what they're doing can be really helpful. So I work a ton, as does every speech pathologist, on story grammar and sentence structure. So just being like, hey, I'm going to use the but conjunction today. Awesome, cool. One time today, I want to see you use that just so that they're already pre-thinking about it. And I do that in my session so that if a teacher were to do that, it shouldn't surprise them.
That's really cool. How do the kids know what their target would be? How do you frame that up for them so that they have an idea of what they want to work on or what they should be thinking about?
Yeah, so depending on the student's goals, at the beginning of the session, I always tell them kind of a three-step, like, we're going to tell a story about what we did this weekend. We're going to listen to a story and retell it. And then we're going to practice if there's like a drill-based portion. And then one thing that I try to do is have that visual support if I'm using one right there for them. And then I give them a little time, like, hey, what's one thing you want to try to do today? Like, do you want to get 3 out of 7 of these? Do you want to remember the characters on your own without me asking so that they have some ownership in what we're working on?
I like that a lot. And it makes me think of how in content core areas, we ask students to maybe look at the student friendly language we've put on the board for standards and think about what they want to learn or what their goal might be or how we might co create success criteria for a day's activity or something like that. And so it's really neat that you can do that in the realm of speech as well.
Yeah. And I think giving them that ownership, I've just seen a lot more buy-in with that, especially as the kids, students at kindergarten and first, maybe even second grade, like, I'm in charge. But after that, like, I really need to start handing the reins off because before too long, they're going to be in charge. So it's kind of easing into that, being in charge of their own learning.
Absolutely, which is really important for it to stick and for them to keep showing up, right? They have to want to be there and it has to be worthy of their time. I liked at the start of your response how you said you explained the why. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this activity today? Why do you come to speech in general? That is really powerful and really essential.
And then for all of my students, but especially students who I see for executive function, I see that teachers, parents, myself, all of us can do a better job of naming our own executive function strategies. We all do things like write a to-do list, use voice to text instead of typing something out to make it faster. As students start reaching that 5th grade, 6th grade, and then especially up into high school, I see a lot of resistance. They feel like they're cheating. They feel like they're not doing it the right way.
Oh, interesting.
And I really want to break that down because we have so many tools everywhere, all around us because of technology, that if we can just show kiddos how they can get the same result by making it a little easier on themselves and normalize that idea, I think we'll see a lot of students advocate for their own tools more And that's a big deal to me because it goes right along with growth mindset. Students who can't advocate for what helps them really can't use a growth mindset because they don't know how they can make it work.
Yeah. Wow. Say that again. That is really important.
So when I see my students, no matter how many times I say the word yet or encourage them to think about we're getting better, if they don't know what tool or strategy they can use, it doesn't really feel real. So they need to be able to advocate for their own tools and strategies to make that growth mindset actually function for them.
Wow. Yes. And that, no one said that to me yet. And it's brilliant and very logical and simple. It's almost like, you're not going to become a faster runner without knowing that you have to find a place to run, or you need shoes that are comfortable, or to be barefoot if that works for you, whatever it might be. But you have to know what works for you. And if kids don't know the tool, then that growth mindset really is just kind of lip service. It's not meaningful. That is super powerful, Charlie. I'm really glad you brought that up. And it also, when we think about executive function and we think about behavior as well, oftentimes on an IEP, we'll have the opportunity to ask, especially a student who maybe is older than a kindergarten or first grader, well, what does work for you? What do you like? Where do you like to study? Morning or afternoon? When do you like to learn? And if they don't know those things about themselves, that's our job to help them discover that for sure.
Definitely. And along with normalizing strategy use, I'm big about normalizing mistakes. I type on the board with my students all the time and I can't spell. It's really hard for me. And I just pointed out, like when a student notices, like, oh, you spelled that wrong. Cool. Thanks for letting me know. I got to fix that. Because that's part of normalizing what it looks like to be a person who has stuff. We all have struggles.
Yes. And I talked previously on the podcast with Alfonso Mendoza about making mistakes and technology specifically. And he says, get clicky with it. Like just go and mess it up and don't be afraid to make those mistakes as an adult, as a teacher. So I think that's really important. We model that for students, because if we're not taking risks, if we're not messing up in front of them, then they don't know that it's okay for them to do the same. No matter how often we say it, our actions speak louder than words. So that is really cool. You've given us so much to think about. We're going to take a quick break. And then when we come back, I have one more question for you. SYS is an online management company that takes a different approach. We partner with schools to manage solutions. Whether you are a district adding an online option for students or an online school looking to go in a new direction, SYS Education can help make it exactly what you need it to be, with high-quality products at a fraction of the cost that schools pay to other companies. We are not just an educational consulting company, we are online educators ourselves, and a tech team like no other. Let us help you bring your online school experience to the next level. Find out more at syseducation.org or by emailing info@syseducation.org. Set up your free consultation meeting to discuss how SYS might be able to help your school. Welcome back. I have the awesome pleasure of talking with Charlie Hoffmeister today, speech pathologist extraordinaire. My last question for you, Charlie. I think back a lot of times to when I was in college and my advisor told me when I was getting my special ed degree that I had to prove myself useful. Whatever school I ended up in, whatever context, inclusion, pullout, whatever it might be, I had to be an asset. And first I was a little put off by that. Like, I don't need to prove myself. They should know, I'm a special education teacher and I'm going to be helpful. But we all in education have our specialties. We have the things that we're really good at or the skills that we can share that are there to help students do better and achieve more. And I have always found speech pathologists to be amazing wealths of information. And I've had the pleasure of co-teaching with some and just learning from all of them. I'm curious what you as a speech path wish that teachers would know about the work that you do in schools and how they could collaborate with you. I know you're an asset. Can you prove to the others, what is it about a speech path that makes you guys awesome?
So first of all, speech pathologists do so much more than what immediately jumps to mind. Most people, when I say I'm a speech pathologist, they're like, oh, I worked on my R when I was in third grade. And I love R, no shame there, but I also work on language and executive function, planning, sentence structure, so many of those things that are really related right to the curriculum, especially in like ELA, but also science and history are so dense with those. So I don't want to work in a vacuum, even though I'm in my like speech silo and I pull kids out. So I would love, and I think many speech pathologists would love, if we were getting more of the vocabulary that you guys are trying to use in your core curriculum and your content areas, because vocabulary goals are all over our IEPs.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't have them from you, I just pull them from somewhere random, which isn't super clear for students. The other thing that we can really do, and I know that many speech pathologists who work in schools are working on literacy-based therapy. So if you're sending us like, hey, this is the topic area we're working on, that can be really helpful.
That's awesome. You do so much more than just articulation or even just the basics, what you might think of syntax for language. It's a lot more than that. Can you give us some specifics, maybe some goals or examples?
Yeah, so you just named a couple of the content areas. So I do work on syntax, like maybe I'm working on conjunctions, but for it to be really meaningful for my students, I always try to have a drill portion. Like we're going to work on connecting sentences, combining sentences with and, or, but, and so. And then I want to go directly to some sort of retelling or reading where we're finding those same things so that we're seeing the whole thing. Like this is how it actually functions in your classroom. So less with the early developing stuff, but when we get into the more subordinating conjunctions like although, that kind of stuff is all over a history curriculum. So if I can work on using those forms in drill and then go right to the history text, I feel like we're going to get more connections for students.
More generalization of their skills, right?
More generalization. And that's why I don't want to work in a vacuum. And a lot of my students tell me what I do feels kind of disconnected. They don't understand,
Mm-hmm.
which hurts my heart because I'm working on cognitive clarity. So if I can use the classroom text, it's less new stuff for them to learn and it's more clear.
Absolutely. And it's an opportunity for them to get a second, third, or fourth exposure to that content. So not only are they seeing the content again and getting that content knowledge in a new way, but they're also realizing how the work you're doing with them isn't disconnected, but actually is going to facilitate deeper learning in all their other courses. So we need to be communicating more. We need to be giving you really the brass tacks kind of what we're doing or really specifics, reading passages, chapters, vocab. Is there anything else you could think of that we could be doing to make your awesome work better for kids?
One thing that jumps to mind around this reading and brass tacks is a lot of schools are using online reading material like Newsela or ReadWorks where it's leveled. So if
Yes.
you can show a student how to switch their own reading level when you assign a task, if that's an option, or helping them advocate to go to a lower reading level in a content area so that they can get the material before they look at that really hard structure, they have a little bit of background when they do come up to their grade level reading to break it down, right? Because so many
Yes.
students get stuck trying to unwind those really complex sentences so that they're not really catching the material.
Absolutely. I think we can all relate to that too, whether we had speech therapy in our lives or not, looking down at a social studies or a science text and not being able to comprehend what you just read. And so it is awesome that in the online world we have the ability to pare that down. And it makes a lot of sense that you'd want to do that. So say, okay, we're looking in the history text or the science text, but put it down to a sixth grade level for a minute. Read that passage, get some background, get some context, figure out the gist of what this is. And then if you want, you can bring it back up to your eighth grade or 10th grade, whatever level you might be at. But I think that's really wise because you're not then prioritizing all these deficit skills, right? You're prioritizing their assets and what they can do first. And then they're gaining new knowledge. And then you can go on and apply your more advanced skills to that. It makes so much sense. I'm so glad you spoke to that because speech pathologists have just such a vast array of skills and knowledge and strategies and tools and areas in which they do support students. And I think we don't all always understand or remember that. So, really important. I mean, I guess you'd tell me if I'm wrong, but you'd probably rather that we give you too much or give you something that maybe is a little bit out of your realm, but most of the time it'll probably work.
Yeah, I would say, especially if a speech pathologist has worked in any other setting, like our realm is pretty flexible. We can really relate because everything has communication in it. So we can really pull in pretty much any content or skills area There are students who I have who their goal is communicating appropriately in class. So we're talking about things, other places where they can communicate appropriately, and bridging. So there's a lot of stuff that we can bridge. Just send us everything.
Send it all your way. I like that. Charlie, thank you so much for being here today, for opening our eyes to all the possibilities of online speech therapy and collaborating with our speech pathologists more effectively so that students can gain skills more efficiently and do better in their schoolwork as well. I'm really thinking and going to be meditating on that generalization idea and that idea of including everybody in the process. So whether it be the parent or the general ed teachers, special ed teacher, speech pathologist, all together so that the services a child is receiving are really cohesive and nothing feels siloed or disconnected, even though it might be in a pull-out setting or that kind of thing. So thank you so much for your time today, for your awesome ideas, for your inspiration around growth mindset too. That was awesome. If listeners want to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
My personal website for my business is juniperspeech.com. And if you want to just send me a direct email, my email is charlie@juniperspeech.com, Charlie like a boy. And you'll be able to find me either through the website or through that email.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll have some resources in show notes as well for listeners in case they're interested in learning more about what speech pathologists do and some materials that might be helpful to them or to other speech paths out there. Thanks again for your time today, Charlie. I wish you all the best this school year.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of SYS Presents Adventures in Online Education. Special thanks to my thoughtful and talented guest, Charlie Hoffmeister. Her insight into what speech therapy is and can be leaves us all wanting to collaborate more for the benefit of our students. We learned that generalization of skills is key and that speech is about way more than producing individual sounds accurately. Next week, I will talk with Lainey Rowell, author, speaker, and coach about what it means to be an evolving learner. You won't want to miss it. If you liked what you heard today, please hit subscribe and give us a rating. On Twitter, you can follow me, Natalie Conway, at AOE Natalie, and the show at SYS Presents. If you're interested in finding out more about SYS education, head on over to syseducation.org. This podcast wouldn't be possible without our exceptional team at SYS Education, including sound engineers Natalie Farrell and Matt Duran, and producer Bo Neal. Thanks for listening, and remember, we can learn new things.
Thanks for listening.